This has been a very interesting few weeks to say the least, and for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I will provide some background information, and for those of you who have been following the story, I'm going to give some updates. This started on August 22nd, 2017, when I was supposed to give a talk at Ryerson University with doctors Jordan Peterson and Gad Saad. We also had Faith Goldie, formerly of Rebel Media, on the panel. It was called The Stifling of Free Speech on University Campuses, and it was to be held at Ryerson University, but ironically enough, it was shut down. Now, I teach at Ryerson. I've taught there for 16 years, and I co-sponsored the event because of my position there. Or the person who had organized the event, Ms. Serena Singh, used to be a student of mine back in 2016, and she actually arranged for Dr. Jordan Peterson to give a talk at my human sexuality class that was held in February 2017. And she also asked me to appear on this panel. So a week before the event, I got a call, as did Ms. Singh, saying that the event was shut down. And there were two factors involved. The university only talked about one, but in reality there were two. One was, unfortunately, the tragic events in Charlottesville where a woman was murdered. And prior to that, a bunch of reprehensible Nazis, white supremacists, and people on the alt-right were having protests with some pretty ugly language, and it got violent. And that's not what shut it down immediately, however, because that was over the weekend. And we got the call on Wednesday morning. Several hours before that call, there was a group that started a Facebook event called No Fascists in Toronto, and they apparently flooded Ryerson with phone calls telling them that they were going to come out and cause some trouble. That, timing-wise, seems to be a bit more likely a reason for Ryerson closing this event down. And for the people who've been saying, well, Ryerson never had to host these people in the first place, you're absolutely right. However, they did do a security check months ago, and they said that it was okay to go ahead. Again, the recent events in Charlottesville, plus this protest, this misguided protest, seems to be what made them decide to shut down the talk. Now, I don't begrudge them. I've said this in numerous media interviews. I understand that the university has a responsibility to its community. And so if there was fear that a bunch of people would come out and cause severe disruptions, not just yelling and but perhaps causing some violence, destruction of property, I understand that Ryerson felt they couldn't protect the community properly. So that's not the issue. What the issue is how myself and the rest of the panelists were portrayed. And as you can see in the screen, there was some pretty ugly messaging going on. And I think there was careless messaging because although Dr. Peterson and Faith Goldie seemed to be the primary targets, Dr. Saad was also one of the targets. And relatively speaking, not that many people knew about me, but because of the language, I was being lumped in with the other three co-panelists. You can see it quite clearly. So I reached out to the organizer of the protest, and I said, I think you have the wrong idea. We are not Nazis. Now, I can't speak for everybody else, but I am speaking for myself. And I said, here's my background. I was very clear, and you can see it. And the organizer refused to get back to me. I reached out several times, and she just continued to go on the media and say the same things she was saying, which were completely not only misguided, but wrong. And I kept trying, and I finally told her, because you haven't responded, I am going to go public to let people know that this is what I tried to do. What I tried to do was reach out person to person, because when you have these kinds of conflicts, when you have people saying things about others, when it becomes this us versus them, the best thing to do is try to reach out one-to-one to show them, here's who I am. If you can talk to me, sit down, hear me out, and you still believe that I am this reprehensible person that you're portraying, so be it. But perhaps reason will take over, and you might realize you've got it completely wrong. Again, I'm talking about myself. As far as the other panelists, it seems that there's been a very black and white perspective on what they said and who they are, because people haven't given enough time to actually hear what they're arguing, or so it seems when you listen to how they, or you read how they've been discussing my co-panelists. And so they just portray them as this horrible Islamophobe, transphobe, take your pick phobe. In any event, I went public in the media and on Twitter and Facebook explaining what happened so that people could get a better perspective on what actually transpired over the past few weeks. They can get a sense of the players. And that's all I've been trying to do since day one, is I've been advocating for critical thinking. And in order to do that, in order to have an objective, realistic perspective on what's happening, you have to gather as much evidence as possible. So I was trying to provide that evidence. Unfortunately, the leader of the event kind of doubled down on her aggressiveness, and I would say even on her silliness, as she made light of the evidence that I was presenting, showing, look, this is not the way to deal with these issues. Of course, our resolve was never diminished, and we are going to hold the event on November 11th, 2017, at a much larger venue. As with everything else, the important links are in the description below. And I hope that anybody who engages with me in social media or in other ways realizes that I am not right-wing, definitely not a fascist, not a Nazi, and as I did with the organizer of the event, I've been giving my background during my media interviews because I want people to understand the person behind the labels. I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I'm only speaking for myself. So I've explained that my grandmother was a survivor of Auschwitz. Many of my family were wiped out during World War II. My mother opened up Canada's first sex store, and she had to fight against the government and laws where they were trying to tell her what was right, what was obscene, what was acceptable, whether she could run her own business, whether she could provide for her family. And she fought against that, and she won. My father, a well-known artist and animator, used to work for the CBC. He was part of the Israeli intellectual and artistic elite. And he got kicked out of that community. He left the country because they couldn't handle someone like him saying, let's try to be just a little bit more tolerant, compassionate, and humane to the people around us. Let's treat everybody as human beings. Let's give them dignity and respect. These are the people I was raised by. And returning to my mother's groundbreaking business, she opened up Canada's first sex store, and it was very female positive. It was also LGBTQ etc positive. She was a pioneer in the field. Also, when I was 1 year old, my parents adopted my brother, who happens to be black and, as we found out later on, gay. My sister, who my parents adopted when I was 7, also turned out to be lesbian. So I have a pretty open perspective because the people around me come from different walks of life. My wife is Japanese. My 3 children are biracial. I mean, the fact is, to call me a fascist, racist, etc., is humorous. Well, it would be humorous if it didn't have potential consequences. When you get labeled in a certain way, there is the risk that whether it's my university or my college or my professional organization or potential patients or clients, they might decide that I am too radical for their needs. The point is, there can be consequences, some severe consequences, when people recklessly label other people with these terms. And all I've been trying to do is help people like the organizer of the protest and those who support her and anyone else who involve themselves in these kinds of activities to see that they really should consider what they're doing and saying. We're not all racist. We're not all Nazis. Some of us are good people, and all we're trying to do is say, let's have an honest, respectful, civil, fact, reality, research, science-based discussion. That's all it is. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. Tell me why you disagree with me. Show me why you think my points are wrong, and I'll be happy to consider them. Maybe I'm going to modify them. Maybe I'll show you why I believe you may be mistaken in either your interpretation of what I'm saying, or perhaps your perception of the evidence that I'm looking at, or whatever else it is. And I don't think that is offensive. I think it's something to fight for, and that's why I've been fighting this battle for very many years. All of my students know the number one thing that I teach in my courses is critical thinking. I tell them anybody can lecture out of a textbook, anyone can show a few PowerPoint slides, anybody can even present their research. But to teach students or anybody else to be able to analyze the information honestly, accurately, and taking into consideration as many facets of the information as possible, that is such an important skill, and that's what I believe every academic should be doing when they're in such an important position, which is to teach other people. And it should be not only at the university level, but at high school, junior high school, and elementary. We need to teach people to think for themselves. We need to teach people to feel that they have the right to say, hey, I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying, and here's why, and to do it in a very respectful, proper manner. On a related note, the other day I sent out a tweet stating that although I disagree with many of Ben Shapiro's points, I do respect the hell out of him for being what I believe to be a very intelligent person with integrity, who's extremely consistent in his beliefs. Mr. Shapiro is very clear about where he stands with respect to religion, culture, politics, finance, etc., but he's consistent in those stances. And regardless of where he stands with respect to these different issues, if he sees somebody saying or doing something that is wrong, false, inaccurate, deceptive, etc., he will call them out on it regardless of who they are, regardless of which quote-unquote group they belong to. And by the same token, if he sees somebody on the other side doing something right, he praises them for it. He explains to people, regardless of their affiliation, that if they want to do something good for society or for humanity, they need to do steps A, B, and C. He doesn't care what quote-unquote group they belong to. He just wants them to do things right so that it will have a positive impact on society. In that way, I believe he's very similar to someone like Dr. Peterson or Dr. Sad or myself, because all we're saying is, let's not let ideology drive us. Let's look at the facts, the evidence, the reality around us. Let's take a logical approach to analyzing these things and see what works best. What's going to help the greatest number of people get along together, function as a society, as individuals, as families, what have you. That's what we need to do, and that's all that we're calling for. And the problem is, if we say 99 things that somebody agrees with, but we say one thing that they disagree with, they negate those other 99 things, and suddenly we are on the wrong side. Suddenly we are a fascist, Nazi, Islamophobe, transphobe, etc. And this is what we're fighting against. We're trying to say, look, step back, analyze things from a place of intelligence and rational thought rather than emotions, and that should help you arrive at the best conclusions. Now, to be clear, I am speaking only for myself and nobody else I've mentioned in this video, but I would hope that they and everybody else share these sentiments. And I hope that anybody watching this video can see beyond the label, see beyond the black and white thinking, and say, here's a human being who has his own background, and all he's trying to do is to promote a compassionate yet evidence-based way of functioning.